and welcome to Bring Your Own Book Club, a podcast where no one tells you what to read because we're not in school anymore.
Welcome to you, to your own podcast.
Thank you. And I am here. I am Jillian Nussbaum. I am here with my best friend, Miranda Butler, and we are here to talk about some books that we have been reading. And let's just get right into it.
Oh my gosh. So, this is really interesting for me because a book club and being an English teacher are way different. Like, you might think, wow, that sounds really easy for an English teacher to do. But I was like, how does one do a book club? I don't know.
That's
Um,
actually a really great segue for me to explain the podcast because everyone is here joining for the first time.
Yay.
I love the idea of a book club. I love friends getting together and talking about a book that they've been reading. And I like seeing people talk about things that they're passionate about. And I like learning what other people have learned by reading books because they want to share it. But I really don't like being told what to do.
hmm hmm
And the thing that makes so many people not read books as an adult is because they get told what to read throughout high school and college. So I thought, why would we do that to ourselves as adults in a book club and make everyone read the same thing at the same time, at the same pace? No, thank you. So the idea behind this podcast is that bring what you've been reading, bring what excites you, bring what has been interesting to you, and tell me why. Tell me about it. And I'll share mine. You share yours, and we can just go.
Oh my gosh. So, two questions. Question one, is this a podcast that allows spoilers?
Yes, I think if it's like a really big spoiler, then maybe just warn ahead of time.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that for big things.
But I think, and I don't think there's really a way around a book club where you talk about a book and don't spoil it.
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was just checking. Because yeah, it'd be hard to talk about the plot or characters without saying what's happened. So, uh, mild spoilers, I suppose. And then what was my other question? Oh, I'm having this idea. You can cut this out. The idea is, have we both prepared books? Or not prepared, but we've both read a book?
Yeah, ideally on the podcast, we've both read a book, but if there's something that one of us just wants to go off on, or like we've planned to talk about just that one thing, then sure, we can just veer in that direction. I want it to be pretty natural.
Yeah.
You can tell me what you've been reading, I'll tell you what I've been reading, and we can just start where we feel like starting.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I was just thinking it would be really funny if we never knew what book the other person was going to talk about. Because the thing about having me on your podcast is that the variety of books in my library is astonishing. I
Same.
mean, people might think like, "Oh, you're a scholar of Victorian literature and I've got all the Victorian lit and I've got all of the dense literary theory and philosophy." But also I have just read a lot of romance, and that's what I brought for today. I looked at my current library, and I use a lot of ebooks and Audible, and I was like, okay, the most recent book I finished is a two-book series called These Hollow Vows. It's a somewhat young adult, kind of like fairy romance fantasy situation. But then like the other book next to it was called The Narrative Brain, which is like a socio-philosophical book about like how we think, written by a German guy and translated into English. And then like uh previously like 1984 is close on my list because I was teaching that recently, and that's just another total different thing. And yeah, so I that's what I was ready to talk about, but it's just so interesting the way that a person who loves to read will read almost anything. Like
Exactly.
and there's no bad books.
So I think that's actually great. Like, unless there's something like sensitive content that you know it would be like triggering for me or for large
Mm-hmm.
portions of the audience, give me a heads up.
I
But
will.
otherwise, I don't really see that there's a reason to know what each other's going to talk about. That's part of the fun of the book club is you don't have to prepare. You just have to have enjoyed yourself reading a book recently or
I
not
know.
enjoyed yourself and want to vent about it.
I know. Well, and so the other thing I was going to say, I was driving earlier thinking about this podcast and I was like, I need a word, an adjective like good. Like if I'm going to say this is a good book, like that could mean so many things. I'm going to talk about a good book. It was a good book. Is it a good book for everyone? Is it a good book for the criteria that some people consider good? Like, I don't know, maybe not. But I liked it. And so I guess if you want me to just give a super brief intro, I can tell you a book called These Hollow Vows and These Twisted Bonds. I forget which one came first. These Hollow Vows is first, but that's the name of the series. It's by Lexi Ryan. I would say it's like a PG-14. It's like it's not spicy, but it's a romance. It's got some nice things that are not super explicit or anything. And the concept, like many of this genre, is that a young human girl goes to a fairy world, the Fae, as they say. But
I have to stop you already because I think it's so funny when you start a book by specifying that it is a human girl.
you know, I don't remember where this joke came from, but with my grad school friends playing D&D, I think someone was like impersonating a human who is not a human, and they were like, uh, "I kiss the human with my human mouth," and that just became a joke in my friend group. Like, "I kiss you with my human mouth,"
That's
like,
amazing.
and I say that to Bella too, that I kiss her with my human mouth.
That's all.
So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought great start. Excellent.
it's excellent. I do, actually, both personally and professionally, I do a lot of supernatural and non-human readings. You never
Very
know what
fair.
species a thing is going to be, human-ish. Um, but the plot kind of hook is that this young woman lives in a, I would say it's a Cinderella story. She lives in a world where she's in this super exploitative capitalistic semi-Victorian system, and your debt, it's actually like really real. Your debt just like accrues, right? And like the more debt you have, like the more interest you have, and you have debt forever. And yeah, it's
The stress level is rising as I'm hearing you talk.
and so again, it is fantasy, and it is, I don't think it ever says it's like explicitly Victorian or any real time period, but it's not like current modern. It doesn't have like modern technology or stuff. And the idea is that people make contracts to either get out of debt or to make one debt pay off another debt.
Who is all this debt to? Is it just various throughout life like normal, or is there like an evil overlord?
Yes. So it's exactly like the real world,
Oh
where
God.
it's like debt to your landlord, and like so it's a Cinderella thing where a, I think it's an aunt by marriage. So her uncle was raising her and he loved her, but then he died. Her aunt and her cousins are evil, just like the Cinderella step family, and they are basically like making her pay to be there. And then she owes debts to other people from just like life. Like it's not like college debt or something. It's just like being a human is expensive, and there is a wealthy elite that has all of the money, and they exploit people horrifically for all of the money. And this is funny because this is the the plot hook, like the first two chapters. But to me, this is the most interesting part. And then they like go to fairy world, and this is not as relevant. But I was like, this kind of like speculative fiction, like projection of what life debt is to like be a person alive in this world is pretty amazing. And so she owes too much debt. If you owe too much debt, it's kind of like you can you can go to jail or like get sold. I wouldn't say slavery because that's too wrought of a thing to say.
And it's more based on debt than just property.
Yes, yes. But if you think about, and I think this is kind of what I'm thinking, if you think about like Victorian debtors' prisons, or you think
Yeah.
about like it's something like that. And so you kind of can be forced into eternal servitude because your debts aren't paid and you have too much to ever do.
And when you say eternal, it's a fantasy world. Is it legitimately
Oh,
eternal?
well, no, actually, that is good.
Okay.
It is not in the human world actually eternal, but in the fantasy world, it doesn't say either way. So you could create more narrative around this whole thing if you wanted to. Again, this is just the hook is that she, the main character, is going to go off and be kind of indebted and taken away. But her sister, her younger sister, think just like Prue from the Hunger
I
Games,
was
right?
already thinking it.
Her younger sister goes and makes a deal with someone else to get her sister out of debt. The younger one doesn't really understand the full consequences, and so the younger one gets taken off to be sold to become a servant, etc. And the older one, our main heroine, is like, I'm not going to let this happen. This is terrible. And her younger sister ends up being bought by the fairies, which
Hmm.
isn't unusual, but also isn't usual.
Yeah.
And so then the main
It's a
character,
thing that can happen. They know it can
yeah,
happen. Yeah.
exactly. And so the main character goes to the fairy world in search of her sister to save her.
Hmm.
And that's, again, that's like literally the first two chapters. But that's what hooked me in because I will read trash, qua trash. Like I will do it, but I think something that people really like, and this is again, this is on the verge, on the fringe, not the fringe, on the outskirts of romantasy. Again, it's not like spicy and explicit, but it has some of those same tropes and things of like A Court of Thorns and Roses and stuff that like people really like. Um, but that romantasy thing is that this world is really fleshed out and complicated.
I love that.
There's political intrigue, and there's, like I said, like this bizarre system of like money and debt and like human labor. like there's these things that are so fascinating. And so when all of that was my plot hook, I was like, okay, like I will read this not just because I'm bored or just because I want something fun, but because there's something original and interesting. And to me, that was the whole um, commentary on debt, I guess, which only comes up in the first two chapters and then it's unimportant.
That makes sense. It's important that stories have that underpinning to them, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things I learned from you or discussed with you, it's been so long now, it's kind of hard to put into words where the idea originated. But when you first started going to grad school, we had a conversation about like what drew us to science fiction. And
Yeah.
there was the element that it's sort of like Greek fantasy. It takes the normal world and then adds another layer on top of it of metaphor, which is nice. But also, something that I hadn't thought about really until discussing it with you is that all really great science fiction and fantasy is about anxiety, right? Like
Oh, it's true.
it's all about taking something that's happening to us in the world and extrapolating it into an unfamiliar setting so that you can further explore it. And so
Mhm.
Debt is a really good like version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And a really good addition to like a myth like Cinderella, for instance, which modern fairy tales have been in my whole young adult life a big part of the fantasy popular genre.
Yeah.
But a lot of the original material or like the skeletal material, like the basics of Cinderella, I mean, I guess, some of the Grimm's fairy tales have more fascinating details, but the black and white elements get complicated in these bigger speculative stories. It's not just my stepsisters are mean because they are mean. It's the way that humans are valued in this society is based on labor and based on like an idea that someone owes something to someone else. And these rich women don't owe anyone anything. And so they feel entitled to stomp all over someone who owes everyone everything, which
because they
is,
are literally entitled because
yes,
they don't have debt and the other people do, and that creates a different dynamic in terms of what they are literally entitled to do in society.
exactly. And so, yeah, that it just kind of highlights that and then makes again, like to me, a straight up black and white Cinderella story is like, but you don't have to be that mean. Like,
Exactly.
you don't like, I mean, people exist, don't get me wrong, but like, I like that you're making me think about that. And so that's what got me hooked. I don't know. What do we do next? What do you tell me the start of yours?
Yeah, I was going to tell you about my book and then we can sort of just discuss where it takes us. I like finished a lot of books recently, but I actually want to talk about one that I am 80% of the way through. I love food histories, I love micro histories, and truly from the bottom of my heart, I think that the best travel advice I have for people who might not be able to actually travel is to read cookbooks and culinary histories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because we put so much of our history into our food and into our culture that it's a really great way to become immersed in something at a really intimate level. And I don't mean like, you know, a British person's take on Mexican food. I mean like literally like read a book about traditional Mexican cooking from like a Sonoran chef or something. And so it's not like the majority of what I read, but it's like a huge subgenre of what I
Mm-hmm.
read is food history, culinary exchange. And so I have just started, or rather, I am almost now done with The Cooking Gene by Michael Twitty.
That sounds fascinating. Never heard of it.
I love Michael Twitty. He is such a beautiful, unique voice in the world in general, but especially in cooking. He covers so many categories and he does so intentionally and proudly. He is a black, gay, Jewish man. And he fully owns all of those identities. And he wrote a book called The Kosher Soul, which is next on my to read list because he talks about the intersection of like soul food and Jewish cooking.
That's such a great title and
I
concept.
know, I know. It's so good. He's so sweet and smart and introspective and thoughtful, and I've admired him for many years from just the cooking stuff that I've seen him do and the talks I've heard him give. Um, but I didn't want to jump right in with the Kosher Soul book because, spoiler alert, I'm Jewish and
Mhm.
I know about kosher food, and I didn't want to meet him on my terms. I wanted to meet him on his terms. So I started with the cooking gene, and it's a really beautiful, fascinating look into African American culture and the origins of the different forms of African American cuisine in the Old South and by state. And sometimes that means soul food, sometimes that means Cajun food, sometimes that means, just what a more broader idea of Southern cooking. And
Mhm.
he explores it from every possible angle. And it's really beautiful and heartbreaking. And it puts into perspective some things that we all know, but might not know specifics of, or know as deeply, or have, if we're not African American, have felt on a personal level. And so he goes through, I don't know enough to know if it is all of the states that were affected by the transatlantic slave trade, but certainly all of the states that he considers the Old South and that have personally affected his family. And he goes through those states in a very interesting way. First, he looks at the Black population there, specifically the African American Black population there, how they got there, at what points of the slave trade different people came there, and from what places in Africa. He talks a lot about the intersection between a modern African American population and the percentage of white that they became unwillingly, and how that affects their concept of identity, whether or not they want it to. And, he will talk about then the challenges of being an African American person and the things that you have in common with all the other African American people in your vicinity, and also the things that you can never know. Because it's not like people kept records of their family,
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't. But there are things they do pass on, like charm bags, I can't remember the word, but mysticism and herb bags that you would carry around your neck. And he still carries one. And it's something that even separated from culture, like African American mothers passed on to their children, and how that affected cooking and what that means. But he also dives into slave histories, like individual stories of people you might not know well, and people might know really well, like Frederick Douglass. And then he also tackles it from a very personal angle, because in identifying how much personal history he was robbed of, he is simultaneously going on a journey to discover his own DNA lineage and try to figure out where each of his individual ancestors came from.
Yeah, that's like you said. I was like, how do you explore something from every angle? Oh, that's how.
Yeah, it's really beautiful and thoughtful. And he, tracks down some of his family to Sierra Leone and talks about that food tradition and how he can see it was brought over to certain places. And then he expands that more broadly. And this is likely the type of people and this group of people that came over unwillingly, into the United States. And this is why they brought that in and why that was so important. He talks about being Ashanti, which is like a very specific identity that one of his ancestors was very proud and like made sure no matter what that people told their children that they were Ashanti. Really interesting. But he also does something that I think, for me as a not African American person, it makes me very uncomfortable. And I can only imagine that it would make African American readers even more uncomfortable, and he's very aware of it. He does tasks associated with slavery in an effort to understand how and why they cooked the way they cooked.
Okay.
So he goes onto farms and he picks tobacco, he picks cotton, and he gets up early. He even worked at a plantation once and like prepared a meal for like a white family for like an event. It's not like he was like, "Can I be your slave for a day?" That wasn't that. It was like there was a reason for it to be there. And he talks about his feelings in doing that process. And he knows certain things about songs that his relatives sang when
Mm-hmm.
doing their tasks. And he started to understand more of the practical use of that,
Yeah.
understood what it felt like on your back to pick cotton in that way. He understood the discomfort on your hands of picking tobacco and why that might have played into how food was prepared and the way it does. It's a very fully sensorial experience
Yeah.
that I would not, just as me, have any idea of. And I just think it was a really, my instinct is to call it a brave thing to do, because that's really emotionally difficult.
I was gonna say, like, did he write about having a huge emotional response to that kind of experience? Because that sounds wild and like really, really tough.
Yeah, he talks, I mean, there's so many different experiences he has that some he seems to have definitely had a more emotional, or he's written about more of the emotional impact than other times in the experience. But there's also a sense of altruism in it, and I don't mean that in like the naive way. I mean that in the pure, like, he's doing it for a purpose. He's doing it because he knows his story isn't necessarily unique. And he wants to be able to give that understanding to other people who might be missing that in their own histories and having trouble relating to either their own relatives or the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really interesting story. And I'm not finished yet. I'm like 85% through. But it's just been a really thought-provoking read, that really makes me think a lot more about how we got to be the way we are as a nation, and the fact that with a lot of things, when you have a culture in the United States, people put American on the end of something to erase your inclusion in fuller society. Like, you know, an Italian American used to be an other, and now it's
Okay.
not quite as much anymore. But this specifically explores an African American identity as a fully realized three-dimensional identity that isn't just an other, that is something unique unto itself, that is different because of how it came to be, that it
Yeah.
couldn't exist anywhere else in the world because, unfortunately, obviously, the slave trade took so many people from so many different places so quickly. Like, it's the
Mm-hmm.
largest forced migration in human history. And because of that, people who would have never met each other from various
Yeah.
countries were forced to intermingle and create a life and have a cultural exchange that wasn't a given that they would have to have done. And of course, that comes with such a tremendous amount of pain and loss and tragedy. But the other side of that, that I'm not saying makes it worth it, but that it's what this book explores, is what that ultimately led to and created. And I just think it's a really beautiful thing to explore so honestly and so fully and so viscerally.
Yeah. I am fascinated by this. I have so many questions. I'm trying not to be too academic because I have academic questions.
Not just
I'm
use your brain
also
however you want.
not trying to draw a parallel or minimize or like compare apples and oranges. I'm not. But there's a really awesome word that I've seen in Latin American, especially Mexican scholarship. The word is autochthonous, I believe, and
Ooh,
it means I mean it's an English word, but in the kind of discourse of magical realism. This word means growing from a very specific soil and native to only that mix of soil. And
yes,
I think
exactly.
that's the word, and like it it embodies like trauma and suffering, but also all of the other things that like came into one place to make something grow, as the metaphor is, because this word comes from plants, I guess. I'm not a biologist, but this word that comes from plants is like, and Jeshua, my lovely now fiance partner, a scholar of Latin American literature, was like, I found this word in scholarship and I was like, have you ever seen this? And he's like, no, but this is great. Like, this is such the right word for how something like magical realism comes to exist only in a very specific, like, political moment and also geographical moment and also all of these things. So, again, I'm not saying those two experiences are the same, but I'm saying that word sounds really useful for what he's capturing in that mixed experience. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
and
all.
first of all, this is why you're my best friend. One of many reasons. I love your brain so much because I've been actually really struggling with this, and I wasn't really going to bring it up today on the podcast because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth or say something I shouldn't say. But this book makes me think a lot about the concept of indigeneity.
Hmm.
And there are many different interpretations of what that word means, and it can get heightened and it can get political. And so, for very many reasons, I am hesitant to call an African American population indigenous to America when they were brought here forcefully.
Yeah, against their will.
Yeah, but at the same time, when I think of indigeneity, there again, there are many um, what's the word? Definitions available. But what I tend to think of is a group of people with a distinct practice that ties them to a specific land and whose identity is dependent on that land. And in many ways, in terms of at least culinary history, African American identities are, I'd say for better or for worse, but in most cases worse, tied to the Old South.
Hmm.
And what does that mean? Can you be indigenous to a place if you reject it? And I'm not saying everyone rejects it, but it's just a complicated thing that you don't want to apply a term to a whole group of people. So the word you just shared works a lot better for me as an
Yeah.
outsider talking about it than indigenous. What's the word
It
again?
works a lot better, I think, because I see exactly the connection you're drawing, but I'm thinking again, friend of the show, Stina, a scholar of Indigenous studies, would be like, well, that's not, I mean, that's not a bad idea, but that's like not what people, uh, that's not how people explain things, or that's not necessarily like, not necessarily quite fitting, but it's close, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So, yeah, I'm glad that that was helpful. And I also think, I don't know. I could be wrong. I know nothing about food. I was thinking I'm not bad at cooking. Obviously, I cook to eat and
Well, you're good
survive.
at cooking. You're the first person who made pork for me that didn't taste like a hockey puck.
I did make good pork for you, and I'm sorry I made you eat it.
No, it was great.
But yeah, so I mean, I can cook okay, right? I'm not
Yeah.
a person who reads food history like you, but I can cook okay. Um, but I mostly had to learn through recipes and stuff, you know.
Mhm.
And I remember asking you for advice as I was trying to get better at cooking. And you were like, if it grows together, it goes together. And I was like, I don't know what grows together. Like that's insane. Like I truly like I've recently been trying to like eat more seasonal fruits and veggies. Like let's get them at their peak, right? And I
Yeah.
have to Google it every time. I'm like, I don't know what season it is that this thing comes to its peak. What like I don't
Totally
know.
valid. Completely
And
valid.
and so all of that is to say that I think almost any cuisine or culture is going to be tied to what grows in the land that the culture is from, and what is plentiful, what is not plentiful. My totally not a joke, wholly earnest family cookbook has so many potato recipes, and that's okay. Like it
For context, Miranda is Irish.
Yeah, I was gonna say it doesn't have to be an Irish stereotype or something. Like it's just that's what they had. And so
Yeah.
this cookbook I have is like, here's a million ways to make potatoes. Like you're gonna eat them a lot. And I think any culture will have stuff like that. And
Yeah.
that's I don't know, that's okay, but it can be complicated with a different cultural history that is traumatic.
Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
and it definitely is complicated, especially in African American history when so many things that were brought to the United States and farmed on the land here
Hmm.
were taken forcibly, just like the people from their
Yeah.
original location, and then not even allowed to be used by the enslaved peoples who were doing the labor to grow them.
Right.
So there is talk about what sorghum meant to various peoples in Africa and what rice meant and what yams meant, and it's all very interesting. So yeah, so that's what I've been reading. How about you tell me a little bit more about what happens once you get past the
Oh boy,
hump
it's
of your book?
so. This is what I was saying at the beginning is like, is it going to be fun and entertaining that our books are so different? Because mine is, I can find meaning in anything. And like I said, I do think it's a very thoughtful book, but it is not nonfiction about a very important
I
history
mean,
or
that's fine.
anything.
I just read all of Discworld and then a few more books, and this is the most recent one. So
Yeah,
don't worry
well,
about it.
I,
This
that's
is
what I was
gonna
saying.
be
This is
different.
just the most recent one I finished, and I was like, well, okay. And I did wish that there was more at the end. I was like, surely there's a third book. Like every fantasy series has like, 4 or 5 or whatever. It's like, nope, there's just 2. I think there might be ideas of like the same world, but like a different, focus or something, but it's just these 2. And that's the thing is like, then the actual plot starts, which is that, and I don't remember how these things connect because to be honest, when I read for fun, I don't take notes. I'm like, yeah, and then that happened and they were connected somehow.
Yeah, I didn't take notes
So
either, but that's the
oh,
point.
but you remember everything that happened. I'm gonna be like, and then
It
they
is
meet this
true.
guy and like, I don't know. But they go, she goes to the fairy world, and the way, I guess this, if I remember it right, the way she finds to get there, because she's a human girl, she can't just like, it's like a parallel world, you have to like go into a portal or something.
Makes
And
sense.
the way she does this is that there is a ball to select the princess, so to speak. And as with, and you might not know this, but as with many fairy fae novels, the idea is that because they are basically immortal, they don't reproduce very well. Because if you think about it, that would never work, right?
That'd be so many people.
Yeah, an immortal race with the human reproductive level, like it
Where do
would,
they go?
where do they go? Yeah, right. So in a lot of these novels, that is both a logical but also a plot device kind of thing, that then they intermarry with humans to have children because it's hard for them to have children with each other. And so the prince of the fairies has to pick a bride, and we get a very Cinderella. I was thinking of Rats. What was that book called? The Selection series. I think it's called The Selection. Yeah, by Kira Cass. Not my favorite series. It's a little weird. The Selection is a series that's like The Bachelor and Cinderella combined, and like a little Hunger Games because it's like being filmed. It's like very
I
strange.
like that someone thought to put those things together. I don't know that I would read it, but I think it's a very interesting premise.
Right. And so it has this bit of like, she's gonna go disguised as a, and it's not even like a bad disguise. Like she's like, I'm vying to be the princess and I'll dress up nice and do the Cinderella thing. And then this loophole allows me to enter their world because humans are allowed to come. And then I'll go meet the fairies. And then like, I think also she knows that her sister was taken by a different fairy king guy. So she's like, okay, I'll get into the royal society and then I'll find the other guy and then I'll find my sister.
Does
And
she know
so
that like what's being asked of her, like by entering a marriage like that? Does she know that she's essentially being bred?
it's funny that you should ask this question, Jillian. Yes and no, right? So she knows the intermarriage and breeding thing, right? That's like common knowledge.
Hmm.
But what becomes a huge climax crux problem later, especially in the second book in this series, is um, the kind of question of a life bond with somebody.
Okay.
And obviously, we all know marriage and life bonds and whatever, but in a lot of these fairy romance stories, they have like the concept of a true soulmate, or the concept of in your marriage, you can like do a ceremony to bind your entire existence to another person. It's
Yikes.
usually romanticized. I know that face you made, that's the face I made. It's usually romanticized as like, and now my partner and I, like, we can always be there for each other and like we'll always know how the other's feeling. And like his strength makes me strong and my strength. I know your face is saying it all, right? I also am not 100% sold on this idea of like a soul bond being perpetually tied to somebody, but it is a very common trope in these stories, especially the supernatural ones.
Hmm.
And so she knows the the top layer of like you'll be married to someone that implies certain things,
Yes.
obviously. But then when it gets to this other part of like the fairy soul bond, she doesn't know what that means,
Mm.
and it becomes I will say very light trigger warning. It's not literally about consent, but it is a little bit of a metaphor for consent.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a metaphor for like you've entered this relationship and you didn't know all of the information about a person, or a person was a little bit shifty, a little bit manipulative, and all of the moral and emotional complexity of that. And then, of course, everything she does is motivated by, like, well, I don't want my sister to die. I need to help find her and like stuff. So I can get into that more if you want with like the male love interest characters and
Yeah,
stuff.
hit me.
So the the bizarre thing she finds out, and I would say this is spoiler, but it's literally like the first 5 chapters, is that she had a male best friend in the human world. And when I first met this character, I was like, I like this. I like the idea of the human male best friend
Yes,
being her
agreed.
love interest, right?
Well, I like it both ways. I like it platonic,
Right,
and I also like it, you know, not weird soul bondy
right. And
control.
so, spoiler, very small spoiler, because it happens very early in the book. Her human male best friend is not a human male best friend. He
Oh,
is actually the prince who is the suitor for this ball she's going to. And so this is fascinating. I actually didn't see it coming, which I
yeah.
usually see everything coming. She shows up at this like selection ball thinking like I've got to do this to find a way to save my sister. And she sees her male best friend, and first she's like, oh my gosh, what is he doing here? And then they like announce him as like the prince, and she's like, well, that's a mistake, like maybe he's pretending, or like he's, I don't know, like lying. And he really is their prince, and he has been on sabbatical in the human world where he was her neighbor. And yeah,
And
you're
is this like Twilighty? Are they like teens for some reason, or are they
I'm
young
trying
adults?
they're young adults. I'll Google her
Okay.
age. I think she's like 21.
Okay.
But
At least they're not being forced to repeat high school for some reason. No one
no, they're
deserves
not
that.
being forced to repeat high school forever. Hold on, what is this? I'm trying to Google. Eh, eh. Oh, never mind. I lied. Apparently she's 18. Um, I think she's 18 and he's 20 or something like
Okay.
that. I mean, they're
Okay.
they're adults. They're not high school, but
But
like,
they're
I
young.
mean, that's young,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so your face as an intelligent and thoughtful person is saying a lot, because I don't remember her questioning enough the timing of this man in her life,
Yeah.
because she's known him for like 2 years, and like he is like a really good friend, and you see him in the first few chapters like genuinely being a good person and a good friend to her. But then it's like she questions a lot of things about like who he is and like what he lied about and whatever, but doesn't necessarily question like why did he show up next door to me, and why
Yeah.
did he show up like 2 years ago, and it like corresponds to the amount of time that like she's been under the care of these horrible cousin aunt family members. And so I think a person like you or me would be like, I should be suspicious. But it is a well written story, and you have so many other questions and things to think about that you can keep reading without feeling like she's a dummy. And I do
Yeah.
appreciate that a lot because so many stories, the heroine is not dumb. I'm not saying she's dumb, but for the suspension of disbelief, the heroine has to like not ask certain questions or has to gloss over certain things.
Or has to
And
not
I,
have a life beyond this
yeah,
love interest. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that this novel does a pretty good job of making her feel, I mean, it's definitely a feminist story.
Good.
No feminist story is perfect, but I think
Well, yeah, there's no
like
perfect feminist because there's no perfect woman.
exactly. But she is self-determined. She's not focused on finding a man, although she does meet people and feel attracted to them and whatever.
Hmm.
But she is really singularly focused on helping her family and on um later like helping other people in need, because it turns out, not surprisingly, they had this idea that like the fairy world is like all wealth and riches and happiness, and oh, guess what, it's not. And like there are people exploited here too, and there are like
Are there
fairies
people
from
exploited there, or are there fairies exploited there, or
fairy
both?
people,
Okay,
just fairies, right?
cool.
Sorry. So there are people, but the fairy people are being exploited just like the human people were at
Yeah.
home. And this kind of context gives her a lot of empathy and motivation to help others, which makes these other plot lines of like her assisting like with potential rebellion efforts and like making friends with people who oppose this faction or whatever, makes it much more interesting and
Yeah,
makes her a better character.
I agree. And I think it makes the book more deep and
Yeah.
intriguing to me
Yeah.
because, and this is what I was hoping would happen when I started this podcast, is we would be able to talk a bit about these very different things that we read and find connections. And one thing that is very obviously a part of the book I was reading is that the legacy of slavery obviously still affects us today. Like
Mm-hmm.
it has impacts from these horrible things that we did to each other really not that long ago. Like a
Mm-hmm.
surprisingly and heartbreakingly short period of time from now. Um, Not to make light of that, but it's just a very clear example of how the way we treat each other has effects that last a while. And I
Yeah.
imagine that in an immortal society, the stratification of
Mm-hmm.
class and power, when people have been alive and have the living, working, individual memories
Yeah.
of the way that they've abused each other, I imagine makes for a very intense, frequently combative atmosphere.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I, like, if I had the book in front of me, I had it on Kindle, but like there is literally a kind of not like a monologue, but like a passionate speech about like stop thinking you're better than other people because you're not. And that entitlement that we talked about in the beginning of my story, being just like you said, being like repeatedly, there's such a good verb. I want Jillian, what's the verb? Like repeatedly perpetuated, like repeatedly
Oh,
validated.
is it like a motif
I
or
don't
like a
know.
theme? Okay, keep talking. I'll shout it
I'm
out
just
if I
trying to
think
think of
about
a
it.
really strong verb. I'm trying to think of a really strong, there's a really good verb for it, but like just constantly
Like,
reiterating,
are you talking about a refrain?
no,
Hmm.
sorry. What
Okay.
I mean is, I, I there's going to be a listener like, I know the word you want.
I know.
Um,
I'm usually so good with words. Listeners, if you
no,
have it,
my
shout
brain is really tired. So I'm in the
it
process of moving. So my brain is like not as fast as it usually is, especially
out.
with words. But like basically the people in power who think they're better than everyone have had that validated by everyone else for decades and centuries and whatever. So there's some verb I want there that I think applies super well to the ruling class in America, or
Yeah.
even people in the US or elsewhere who are bigoted and prejudiced. And even if they don't actually have the power they think they do, like, lower middle class white people who are super bigoted. And it's like, you're not better than anyone. And I'm not dissing on lower middle class people. I'm just saying, like, when the immortal fairies are like, oh, we've been at the top forever.
Yeah,
Um,
I get what you're saying. Like with just normal humans, we all have this sense of self-inflated
yeah,
bias, like we have any authority or
yeah,
right to tell people what is correct and not correct when really like
exactly.
everyone's just doing their best. But if you are an immortal person,
Yeah,
like there's a lot more I see where you're struggling for the word. There's a lot more bias toward your favor. Like there's a
yes,
lot more,
yes.
yeah.
There, exactly. So like if a 40-year-old Karen like feels valid in being better than others, imagine a 400-year-old fairy king feeling valid in being biased against others.
Yeah,
Like
who's
it's
gonna tell him? Who's gonna
yeah,
tell him that he's wrong and that he doesn't have all the answers? He has more answers than you. He's been around 400 years.
exactly. And so I think that in a way that those questions and thoughts about like who gives you this power, why do you think you're better than other people, like are always important in any story, but they come into this story in a way that makes it feel less like not vapid and not just one story, but like there's meaning to interpret if you wanted to read it and have deep thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, when you see fairies a lot of the time in stories, they're, these beautiful creatures that come down and they're arrogant, and it's like that's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of part of how they are for
Who
some
they are,
reason.
yeah.
But like this is why. Like, yeah, of course you're gonna think that way if you've just been allowed to think that way forever. Like just thinking about a 400-year-old fairy makes me think of like a person who might be 400 years old and what was going on in the world 400 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
they've seen a lot of stuff. And, like, as we are no longer young adults, we're just regular adults. We're not middle-aged yet.
No, definitely not.
But, like, I definitely feel that sometimes when you look at younger folks, and this is not me shitting on younger people. I am just not that person. But there are definitely things when you see younger people making choices and you're like, I could have told you that was a bad idea. And now you know it's a bad idea, but if you had just listened, I could
Yeah.
have told you. Um,
Yep.
but but also to your point, I like the idea that like, look, you're the smartest person I know.
Oh, that's so nice of you.
I mean, it's true. You're the smartest, most kind, most wonderful person, but I like that you said you can have deep thoughts if you want to. I love the idea that these are all interpretations that exist in the book, but like
Yes.
you don't have
You
to.
don't have to.
You can just enjoy the fun book and the fairies. That's okay.
Well, and that's kind of what I was saying at the top of this is like I read this purely as escapism. I purely like I am a teaching professor, but I am still an academic in a little way. But I need to read things that are just like this is just for me, you know? And so it wasn't until I thought about like, well, what would I talk about? I mean, if it was a different person, Jillian, if it was a person who wasn't uh what's the word? Willing to go to the deep space with me, then I could talk about like, oh, and this boy is hotter than this boy, and there's
You
this.
can
And
still talk about that.
you
I
can
don't
have that. No, I mean I could if I wanted, but that's just like the least
know.
interesting thing about the book, right? But like I think any people, two people, three people, any humans could have that conversation and enjoy the book thoroughly, and that's the book club that they have, and that's great. I could contribute to that, but I find other things slightly more interesting, um, and so that's what I'm talking about,
I
and
love that.
maybe that's why this is the perfect podcast. I don't know.
Because this way, when you are in a book club with a group of other people who all read the same book, the
Mm-hmm.
majority is going to direct the conversation.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, I just want to hear what your thoughts are. I didn't read the book. I think you're great. I think I'm interested in your take on almost anything. Um,
Oh,
so
well,
yeah.
tell me. Yeah, more shifting back to you.
Oh gosh. It's hard to get into it without specifics, and I'm not averse to spoilers. It's more that the journey is so vast. Um, and his identity as a Jewish man intersects really strongly with his identity as an African American man in this book and in the words he uses. Um, so I chose this book specifically because it wasn't The Kosher Soul, because I wanted to learn things I didn't already know. Um, so I was really surprised when like three chapters in, there was a really beautiful what's the word? Analysis of Jewish culture and Jewish words and Jewish food, because I wasn't expecting that in this book.
Hmm.
And he talks about his journey because he converted. None of his family was born Jewish, but he, like, when he was 7, like, knew. And then his
Hmm.
mom, his his mom, you know, I understand why moms don't want their kids to convert or be a different religion than them, or, there's lots of reasons for it. And so she convinced him that if he did want to be Jewish, they were going to have to circumcise him again.
Again.
Well, yeah, because sometimes the hospitals just do it.
No,
But
but that's what I mean is that I
yeah,
think the American default is just to do it. And then like there are
yeah,
people who convert as adults, but
but it's
like
done. But yeah,
it's
but she convinced him, it's fine, you can be a Jew if you want, but they're
oh
gonna have to
my
do this to you again. And he was like,
oh my
never mind,
gosh.
and spent the rest of his childhood celebrating Christmas. And he was like, mm-mm, not doing that. It wasn't
Okay,
until he was an adult that
I
he
have
like,
to interrupt though. What do you mean by he knew? He like who was the Jewish influence in his life? Like if his family wasn't Jewish, then someone had to introduce him to this.
yeah, it was I think he said, and don't quote me because again, I don't have the book in front of me at this time. Also, Miranda's in the process of moving. I'm currently in the Midwest, which is not where I usually live, so I don't have like all my stuff around to quick
Hmm.
reference. But he saw, that old Ten Commandments movie, I believe is the movie that he saw.
Sorry, I'm not laughing. Uh, I'm laughing at the movie
Yeah, I know.
if it's the one I'm thinking of.
Not the cartoon.
No, but there's like a cheesy live action, like 80s
Yes.
or yeah.
Yes, like
Okay,
with
that's what I'm
the
thinking of.
yeah. And he just really identified with the ideas in it. And I think there was a specific line that spoke to him, but he saw it and he was like, Mom, I'm a Jew. And she was like, I don't think that's true. And so they had a little bit of a tiff about it. And then eventually, like when he was older, he converted on his own terms, and it seems like it was fine, and it's definitely the right choice for him. And there's a saying, um, I'm not a convert. I was born Jewish, so apologies to any converts. I love you deeply, converts, by the way. For those who don't know, Jews don't proselytize. We don't seek converts. Um, it's totally okay if you don't want to be a Jew. There's no pressure there, but there is a pretty rigorous process if you do decide to become a Jewish person. And there's a lot of warning that it's not always going to be easy. You have to do some schooling. There's a lot to it. And so it's really beautiful to me when someone chooses to make that journey. Side note, if you've seen Orange is the New Black, there's a pretty excellent conversion story in there, of someone becoming Jewish. And so there's more in there. So, but all that is to say, I am not a convert, so apologies if I butcher this. I'm also not like a rabbi or an expert. But there is a saying for those who convert to Judaism that your soul was on Mount Sinai when Moses brought the Ten Commandments down. Like you were with us, regardless of,
Oh,
it's almost like being religiously trans. Like it's like you were always this person. You were born into the
yeah.
situation, but you were always this.
Your
And that,
soul was with us, even
yeah.
if you were born into a different. That is so nice.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. I feel it feels cozy to me. It feels warm. This isn't a religion podcast, don't worry. But like for him, what he described was very much that feeling. Like he saw that moment, he saw the story of that Exodus, and something in it resonated with him in a very personal and unique way, and he felt very
Yeah.
drawn to it. And it's just stuck with him his whole life.
Well, if you want to talk about academics, I mean, the concept of diaspora, right? Like
Hmm.
I usually use the example of a diaspora uh, being Jewish people.
It's where the word came from.
But exactly, but a lot of people, and I'm not, again, I'm not a scholar of African American history, but in academia, people do refer to the African American community as a diaspora, as
Absolutely, a
a
hundred
group
percent.
of people from the region of Africa or wherever they were originally from, forced out of their homeland to live somewhere else. And again, I don't want to ever say apples and oranges are the same because they're not, but like those shared experiences make sense to me.
Yeah, and so I wasn't surprised because I knew going into reading the books that he was a Jewish man. I didn't know he had converted or not. It doesn't really matter to me. When you're Jewish, you're Jewish. I only pointed out the specificity because of the question about like what
Yeah.
spoke to him, and it's that being present on Sinai thing. But he pointed out a lot of similarities in terms of our food culture is diverse but united in that same way that diaspora experiences can be. Like African Americans existed in many different states and therefore have many different ways in which their traditional African cuisines developed outside of their homeland, but they're all still African American cuisine. And in the same way, like Jewish cuisine can be in Eastern Europe or North Africa, like in Morocco, there's all these different Jewish foods, but they're all foods of diaspora. And in many cases, for both cultures, African American and Jewish, there are often very beloved foods that are foods of struggle that were there. That's because it's what you can afford and also because it's what laws allowed you to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so he talked with a lot of love about food that for Jews, I mean, a lot of love for Jewish food that outsiders might find kind of disgusting. And he definitely explains later in the book the same way people feel that way about some soul food. And even he has an aversion to some of his soul food in the same way I have an aversion to some of, you know, my
Yeah.
people's food. Like, I'm not a fan of liver and onions. I'm sorry. I know many people who are. That's fine. It's not my thing. It's gross. He has that same kind of aversion to many of the foods that his people relied upon, but he understands the value in them and he still respects them and he doesn't judge how they came to be. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, he talks a lot about how his grandmother, um, who was not a slave herself, but I think was the daughter of a freed slave. I might be one generation removed. I can't 100% remember, so I apologize if I get that wrong. But when she was little, I'm sorry, when he was little, she would eat like cornbread crumbs, like when you grab a piece and all the crumbs fall out.
Yeah,
She would take
yeah.
all those crumbs and put them in a glass of buttermilk and just like eat it with a spoon. And he thought that was
Honestly, I would do that.
really
No, I wouldn't. No, I don't know. I was
buttermilk is so sour, is the thing.
Buttermilk is bad. I was thinking regular milk. I was thinking cornbread and milk sounds good, but
Cornbread
I
and milk
I
sounds so good. But he was like, I don't understand. Like, this is a disgusting thing. Why would you do this? And
yeah.
sort of that was his thought. And it wasn't until he got older and started reading slave histories that he learned that, like, and this I did not know. It shocked me and it was very upsetting. But so, spoiler alert to specifics of slavery. But slaves were given rations, often just like to slaves at large, like not as individuals. And kids were fed as a unit from a trough.
Oh.
And so, what would happen a lot of times is if you were lucky, you would get some of like enough of
Mm-hmm.
that corn to make cornbread and then mix it with stuff and eat it like that. And so when he would question her, she'd say better from a cup than a trough. And like he didn't know what that meant until he was much
Yeah, of
older.
course. Oh,
He talked about finding that disgusting when he was younger. And not really being thrilled with the idea of it as an adult, but also understanding through his practices of like picking things in a field and like doing really hard backbreaking labor, what it would mean to have like the fat from buttermilk and, you know, corn isn't the most nutritious unless it's nixtamalized, which is like a Mexican process to help bring out niacin, but it would feel very nutritious. It would give you calories and energy and make you feel like you could continue on, even if it made you feel also less than human, both in terms of how little nutrition you were getting, as well as the method in which it was fed to you. So there's a complex relationship now with that cornbread and buttermilk where you're like, it is gross, it is sad, it's also a symbol of how we survived. And also now, this thing that you were rationed on, you can have as much of as you want. And whether or
Yeah,
not you want to is a personal and complex thing, but he spoke with respect about it where he didn't used to have any, if that makes sense.
it totally makes sense. I know you don't want to edit the podcast a ton, but the one thing, just cut out the part where I was like, I would do that. I was just thinking I really like cornbread.
I love cornbread.
I don't think I was thinking through what that meant. I was just like, man, just cornbread and milk, like that's not like I would eat that forever. But just
No, no, I
leave
totally
that
understand.
out and go to the part where you explain more what it means.
Well, I think I won't cut it because I will say this. I had the
Okay.
same initial reaction when I read it. He was like, "Ooh, cornbread and buttermilk," and he talked about like the clumps of cornbread and just like looking disgusting to him in the glass, and I was just like, "I like buttermilk pancakes. I like
Well,
cornbread. What's not to like?" And it wasn't until I started thinking about like what buttermilk tastes like.
I guess so. Because I was also thinking when I make cornbread that buttermilk is usually in it.
Yeah,
And so I
exactly.
was like, I mean, there's worse combinations of flavors. Like,
And I think that's very much the point. I think that's where the respect comes from. Flavor wise, it's not the worst thing in the world to think about, but when you're a kid and you know how things when you're gross, like you're grossed out by them as a
oh
kid,
yeah,
they're so gross to you. It
yeah,
still doesn't sound appetizing to me when I think about it as a fully formed adult now, but
yeah,
I think like the fact that it does seem like a strange but innocuous choice
yeah,
when you're a kid is why he went all the way through adulthood before examining it in the first place.
yeah,
Because
sure.
I don't think there's anything wrong with having a gut reaction to something because that's the point of these food histories is you have these thoughts and then you learn about where they come from and what the process is and why different cultures do these things.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't want to sound insensitive of describing that a necessity born from horrific circumstances. Although I learned this from you actually. One of my favorite snacks, which uh, has been named all kinds of things, but fry bread, right?
Hmm.
Which in Arizona is often called Indian fry bread, which I don't think is the right thing to call it, but uh, one of the most delicious things. Like it's so
Delicious.
good.
So good.
And then you told me about how before you ever read this book, this is like when we were in college, and you were like, well, these ingredients combined in this way comes from the exploitation of indigenous people on reservations who were given very specific rations and didn't know how to cook with it. And then I was like, oh no,
But you
like,
still can like it. Like it's still good. And like people on reservations and not on reservations do still eat it. But I think when you come from a non-marginalized group,
yeah,
it can feel hard to talk about, but most people come from marginalized groups in one way or another. And so we do all have foods like that that come from a pretty negative place that also have a positive cultural association that we need to reckon with that imbalance.
yeah. I mean, I guess you're right, and the word uncomfortable is right for it, right? And to be an educated person, honestly, to be a good person, to be a person, you have to be uncomfortable, and you have to be uncomfortable fairly often. And I think not to be in any way, what's the word, anxiety inducing or political, but like I think that's a struggle that many people can't do. Like they can't be uncomfortable or they can't sit and be like, oh, I feel bad now. Instead of learning from that or trying to reconcile the complexity of life, culture, situations, whatever. Some people are just like, nope, 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 nope. And then that's bad. That's
Yes, and I think that I want to say this without being rude or cruel to anyone in particular. I think that depending on your culture and background, there are definitely cultures out there that place a strong emphasis on personal moral purity. And I think that that in itself isn't wrong. Like you should want to be the best possible version of yourself. But I think an outsized emphasis on personal moral purity often comes at the cost of your role as an average person in a society. And sometimes you being morally pure isn't optimal when it conflicts with you being a giving, loving member of a society. So I think people resist feeling uncomfortable because you do put yourself in a situation where you might say an insensitive thing or you might interpret something wrong and then face the consequences of that. And those consequences make you feel morally impure, as if you have had some sort of moral failing and you aren't the person that you wanted to be. But actually, it's the healthiest possible thing for you because you need to push through that and come through the other side in order to actually be the better person who knows more now and can contribute to more people in a more sensitive way.
yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And obviously, like my perspective on this is just coming as an educator, and I'm leaving Utah because there are laws about what I can't teach. And I'm not going to continue being a college professor if I can't say that slavery was bad. I
Yeah.
mean, like I'm not going to stay and say that to anyone. And so again, that's like where my perspective is coming from is people just wanting to fully leave the discomfort and not feel it. And that I like the way you said things. I think you said things in a way that I was feeling but wasn't able to articulate quite as well.
I've just thought about it a lot recently. I'm not particularly more intelligent than you on this topic. It's been something I've been thinking about generally. So I've had more time to formulate that thought. But yeah, I think that is the really interesting thing about humanity in general, what our individual boundaries are, and how we reshape those boundaries and sometimes are limited by them and somehow refuse to be limited by them. But also, this book in particular, like this book is about discomfort. It's about an individual man facing a lot of really uncomfortable topics so that he can attain a greater sense of comfort with who he is and where he came from and what his culture is and how that affects the world around him. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. And I think that for me, the thing that makes it especially beautiful is that it does always come back to food. Because these people who couldn't always write in English or maybe sometimes any language, who didn't have the ability to keep in touch with the places they came from or the people they left, not just in Africa, but being sold from their own mothers to
Mm-hmm.
plantations in other states. Like the amount of separation and pain that exists in all of these stories of so many people that exist in our world today and in their histories, they still managed to pass down food and they smuggled seeds from their homeland that they could plant in their own gardens. And they might not remember why they serve dinner rolls on Sunday, but they do know that that's important. And then he finds that there are cultures that associated starchy foods and breads with holidays and love and gathering. And so the people in his life might not have known why, but they knew it was important to carry on that tradition. And it's beautiful because food is like a language that we consume.
That's funny that you say that because I was just going to say, oops, I kicked something. I was just going to say almost the same thing. And so I, funnily enough, at the very top of the podcast, mentioned that another book I'm probably more than 80% done reading, almost done reading, could have talked about, but it's a little less interesting. Not interesting. It's a little more dry. Is a book called The Narrative Brain. And I picked up this book because I read I don't know if it was an op ed maybe by the author. And it was about how when society forgets everything, we still remember narratives. And that's definitely, like, as an English professor, a thing that I'm aware of and makes sense. Like, even if they're oral traditions, like we tell stories. And this book talks explicitly about how we learn from stories, and we learn from stories better than we learn from, like, quote unquote factual, like, you learn better from fiction than nonfiction theoretically, or you
Yeah.
learn better from narrative nonfiction than from straight dry nonfiction.
Yeah, I
And
could have read all of the stuff in this book, like in a dry, like bullet point list for sure. Like,
mhm,
this is a fact about how slaves ate, and this is how it differed based on age and location. But this is a man telling his
his
story,
story.
and that's
Yeah.
what makes it hit home.
And that's what was making the connection to me. And again, not a foodie, but I do, as a word literary nerd, totally see a very compelling argument that food is a story, cuisine is a story, that there is actually a narrative, and it's not as explicit as, like, literal words would make it. But that's something that all of these philosophies I think about in my poor academic brain that just ruminates on epistemology at night. Um, I can't think of anyone who has said such a thing in my line of work, of, like, food as a narrative. But I think, well, I think there are probably Irish studies scholars who have thought about that. But, like, there's such an interesting thing there, and my brain is just so excited by it because I agree, and I think food is important, and I wish I could eat more of it, but I am sadly lactose intolerant.
Me
So
too.
womp
Me
womp.
too. Although, thank God for Lactaid. Yeah, same. So yeah, so I think that's the final round for me, but I want to toss it back to you one last time and see what, in summary of your thoughts about the book. Also, I wanted to ask, like, how long ago did it come out? Is it something the
Oh,
writer's still working on?
that's a good question. I know it's recent. These Hollow Vows number 1 was 2021, so 4 years. Number 2 was 2022. So yeah, fairly recently. It is
Okay.
listed as grade level 9 through 12. So just in case you were curious, like I said, it has romance. It has some things that are a little exciting, but nothing explicit. And the connection I'll make, and I'm not trying to shoehorn anything, is that you said something really interesting about the author of your book, like, being the nexus point between all these things, or being the middle of the Venn diagram, or however
Yeah.
you'd like to phrase that. And that is, without spoiling anything, a theme of the story. Like, the theme of the novel that I read, and there's some, I don't think they're heavy handed per se. I think they're young adult coded. I think that it makes the story a little more obvious than maybe what, no, that's not the word, a little more obvious than maybe literary fiction would. But what is literary fiction? Blah blah,
Mhm.
um but pointing out that there is, like, the way it's phrased in the story is like there is space between light and darkness, there is a combination of light and darkness, there is space connecting people who really seem super different from each other. And, like, the concept that a person could actually, like, in the story, this is not a metaphor, it's like a person actually embodies uh the the combining of different disparate ideas, is, like, actually, like, a big crux plot point. And so I like that accidentally ties together. Again, I think a good English major could tie any two things together, but I did that organically. I really did think it. And
I think that makes perfect sense because,
yeah,
I mean, the idea of a chosen one in fiction is very popular, right?
yeah.
From
Hmm.
Jesus to Luke Skywalker, there's always, and I'm not, please don't come at me, Christians. I'm not calling Jesus fictional. I'm not making any kind of statement about Jesus in general. I'm just
We're just
saying,
saying one of the most popular narratives of all time.
yes. And
Yeah.
yeah, it is the idea of a chosen one. But I do like what you're saying that we all exist in a time and place because, yeah, Michael Twitty, the author of my book, is a very interesting man with a lot of identities and a lot of histories, but he is emblematic of the culmination of those histories, and that doesn't make him particularly unique in terms of like a larger narrative. What makes him narratively interesting is that he chose to tell his narrative.
Hmm.
He chose to put words to it. And that really ties into the idea. Again, I mean, this sounds like really cliche, but go with me here. Like, everyone is special. Everyone has their own story that they're telling, and everyone is the star of their own story and has something important to say with their life and their existence. Whether or not you choose to put words to it in a book is totally your call. But I like the idea that in your book, a person can embody a time and place because they're a person, not because they're the chosen one, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of think about, again, I won't spoil anything, but think about the idea in Buffy where Dawn is the key. There's
Yeah.
kind of a moment like that, right? Where an abstract concept could actually be a person. And that's the complexity of the lives we live and
Yeah.
yeah, the consciousness we share and don't share.
What even in how much of it we share depends on how many spells a fairy does, I suppose.
I was going to say not quite in this story, but close enough. You're good.
But yeah, so in wrapping up this podcast, I would ask you to rate the book you read or are reading on 1 to 10 and give what you are excited to read next.
Ooh. Oh man. Hold on. Oh, okay. I have the title. I'll pull it up for you of what I want to read next. Uh I want to read next Death of the Author by Nadia Okorafor. She's an amazing speculative fiction author. One of her most famous novellas is Binti, if you've heard of that, if you read a lot of SF. And what I understand is that it's the title, Death of the Author, a little bit about like AI and speculative fiction about a little bit about the impact that that could have on theoretical and or existing societies. I'm so excited to read it. I have it and downloaded ready to go. So that's that. Another one I just bought is called Silver Nitrate by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, the author of Mexican Gothic. And she is basically a creative writing Victorianist, which is the
Mm,
greatest thing.
yes, it's
And
right up your alley.
yeah, incredible. So those two are top of my list right now. I tend to read a bunch of things at once because
Same.
I love to read.
Yeah.
um, and then if I were to rate this book, the one I was talking about before, these Hollow Vows, I would say on a scale of intrigue and keeping my attention, it's a solid like 9 out of 10. Like very, very much. I didn't want to put it down. I didn't feel like bored by anything. I felt like there was complexity and layers and unexpected turns. Um, yeah, there's probably something better out there, but 9 out of 10, pretty high. Um, and yeah, in terms of romance, I would rank it a little lower. I'd say maybe a 7 or 8 if you're thinking of it as a romance novel. But again, that depends on what you like and what you want. It does have the kind of love triangle tropes. It does have like, some stuff that to me is not as interesting, but again, it does a lot more complex thinking about what a like soulmate is or what a bond with someone is And to your point, Jillian, the second book explores why that's potentially bad. And I really liked actually, I wouldn't say that's part of, well, maybe it is. I was trying to decide if that's part of the romance. But if we say that that's just part of the world building and the intellect of the novel, then that's contributing to the 9 out of 10 because having a fairy high fae court novel be like, oh, actually, a soul bond might be really damaging. That might be exploitative. That could be misused. Like, I have not read a book that was like, yeah, let's talk about the dangers of this, and that
Yeah,
that was a lot to me. So yeah.
excellent. Well, for again, the book I am reading is called The Cooking Gene by Michael Twitty. And when I read a book, I fully reject the idea that there is an objective scale of the quality of a piece of work, fiction or nonfiction.
You made me give it stars.
I'm gonna give it stars. I'm just saying
Okay.
I'm not rating it as any kind of authority. I am
Mm-hmm.
rating it on a scale of what I'm looking for in the book. And what I'm looking for in a book is usually, does it make me think about things in a new way? Did it tell me things I already knew or things I already, or things I didn't know? Because I'm looking for things I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And does it make me care?
Oh.
And so I'm going to say on that scale, I'm going to give mine probably a 9.5 out of 10. And the point 0.5 I'm taking off is just I'm listening on audiobook, so perhaps there was like a section where it would just listed a lot of data. And it might have just been because in the print version of a book, it might have actually all been in a table that I could have scanned very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But this was more was like several minutes of just numbers, which wasn't my favorite. But aside from that, this book is everything I wanted it to be and more. So a solid 9.5 out of 10.
I love it. I love that I might have never heard of this if I wasn't friends with you. And to me, that's one of the many things that makes you my best friend.
I love you. And also, my next book is, of course, The Kosher Soul. I knew it before I even started this one. And I'll put together a Goodreads list for anyone who is interested of all the books that we discuss on this podcast. And I will include, where possible, my rating. And if I didn't read the book, my guest's rating. And yeah, I love you all. Please come to the next book club with whatever excites you.